There are buildings that feel different after closing time. The lights still work. The cameras still record. The air systems keep pushing the same recycled breath through the vents. But once the public is gone, the building no longer has to pretend it was made for people. Tonight, I have 3 original accounts from workers who were paid to remain in places that should have been empty. An aquarium with no animals. An airport terminal with no flights. And the archive beneath a hospital scheduled for demolition. The first story is called The Dry Aquarium. I took the aquarium job because the posting used the words temporary and uneventful. Those were exactly the words I needed in February of 2021. The hotel where I had worked night reception had closed for renovations. My landlord had become creative about late fees, and I was 3 months away from finishing an online certification that I was beginning to suspect would never improve my life. I wanted 8 quiet hours behind a desk. I wanted Wi-Fi, fluorescent lighting, and nothing that could surprise me. The Brackett Municipal Aquarium seemed perfect. It had been closed to the public since the previous autumn. A private company was renovating the filtration system and replacing several of the older exhibits. Every animal had already been transferred. The seals went to Tacoma. The tropical fish were divided between 2 universities. A handwritten list in the security office said the last living thing on site was a horseshoe crab named Franklin, and Franklin had left on January 9th in a blue plastic cooler. My job was to watch the cameras, make 1 patrol at midnight, and let the contractors in at 6. The day supervisor, a heavy-set man named Danner, trained me in less than an hour. He showed me the fire panel, the keys, and a row of 24 camera feeds on 2 old monitors. Half the image labels were wrong. Camera 12 was labeled Gift Shop, but showed the Jellyfish Gallery. Camera 16 said Loading Dock and showed a concrete wall. When I asked about it, Danner leaned close to the screen and squinted. "That one's always been a wall," he said. "Then why have a camera?" He shrugged. "City project." Before leaving, he gave me 3 instructions that were strange enough to sound like jokes, but not strange enough to frighten me. First, the tunnel lights would cycle into maintenance mode at 1 in the morning. Second, I might hear water moving in the pipes even though the exhibits were drained. Third, if the old Dolphin Show announcement played over the public address system, I should write down the time but not call him. "It's still in the automation somewhere," he said. "Nobody can find the trigger." "What does it say?" "Something about finding your seats." He smiled, but it looked rehearsed. My first 3 shifts were exactly what the posting promised. I watched contractors wheel out sections of corroded pipe. I studied between patrols. At midnight, I walked through galleries that smelled of bleach, wet cement, and the stale mineral odor left when water has stood against glass for years. The route began in the river exhibit, where fiberglass tree roots twisted over basins stained green at the waterline. It continued through a room of small coastal tanks, all standing open with their rocks and filters removed. Hand-painted labels still described animals that were no longer there. Wolf eel, giant Pacific octopus, northern red anemone. I found myself shining my light into each tank anyway, as if an animal might have been forgotten behind a stone. The final gallery before the tunnel held a floor-to-ceiling map of the ocean. Thousands of tiny lights marked research stations and migration routes. The map had been disconnected for renovation, but 1 red light remained on each night. It sat in an unmarked region of the Pacific, far from any printed island. When I walked past, the light seemed to move a few inches west. If I stopped, it stopped. I blamed the perforated metal surface and the angle of my flashlight. I also began finding pennies on the floor. They lay in neat pairs beside the empty tanks, dark with tarnish and slick with moisture. The first night, I put them in a lost property envelope. The following night, the same number of pennies appeared in the same places. Danner said children used to throw coins into the touch pool, and renovation vibrations were probably shaking them out from under cabinets. That explanation might have worked if the coins had not all been minted in 1987. At the end of each patrol, I signed a clipboard in the security office. Several pages beneath the current log were older sheets that had never been removed. Most were blank. On one, written in faint pencil, a guard named Evelyn had recorded the same sentence every night for 2 weeks. East Gallery dry. Pelagic doors secure. Guest count 0. The entries ended on February 17th. An empty aquarium is not silent. The filtration rooms hum. Plastic sheeting snaps softly in the ventilation. Every tank magnifies the smallest vibration and sends it back as a low, hollow knock. The ocean tunnel was worst. It curved for nearly 100 feet beneath the largest tank, though the tank itself was empty. Work lights lay along the dry floor above the acrylic shell. Their shadows made it seem as if dark water were still shifting overhead. On my 4th night, the visitor counter changed. The counter was a small gray box connected to the entrance turnstile. Danner reset it before he left each afternoon. At 11:50, it read 0. At 12:17, it read 1. I checked the front doors on camera. Both were chained from inside. The motion sensors showed nothing. I assumed a contractor had bumped the turnstile during the day and the mechanism had taken time to register. At 12:43, the counter changed to 2. This time, I heard the turnstile click from the lobby. The security office was behind the admissions desk, separated from the lobby by a door with wired glass. Through that glass, I could see the dark entrance and the silver bars of the turnstile. Nothing moved. I called out anyway. My voice traveled into the galleries and returned smaller. The counter changed to 3. I locked the office door and called Danner. He answered after 6 rings with the thick voice of someone dragged out of sleep. When I explained, he was quiet long enough that I checked whether the call had dropped. "Is camera 16 still a wall?" he asked. I looked at the monitor. The feed was gray and grainy. It showed the same concrete wall, except there was now a wet handprint in the center. I told him what I saw. "Go home, Tess." That was the first time he had used my name since hiring me. "What about the alarm?" "Set the perimeter. Leave through receiving. I'll handle the report." I did what he said. By the time I reached my car, the counter displayed 11. The next afternoon, Danner called to say an electrician had found a bad ground in the turnstile. He said condensation had caused the handprint. He offered me an extra $1 an hour to come back. I should have refused. Instead, I asked for 2. For the next week, nothing happened. Danner replaced camera 16, but the new feed still showed a concrete wall. He put a folded strip of electrical tape over the visitor counter so I could not see the number without lifting it. That bothered me more than if he had removed the box. On Thursday, a storm came in from the coast. Rain struck the building hard enough to sound like gravel. The contractors left early, and by 10 the parking lot had disappeared beneath a shining sheet of black water. At 1, the tunnel lights switched to maintenance mode. Every third fixture remained on. The others dimmed to a faint blue. On camera 9, the ocean tunnel became a sequence of bright and dark ribs. At 1:14, someone walked into frame. I saw only the back of the person at first. Average height, dark coat, hands hanging at the sides. The figure entered from the far end of the tunnel and walked slowly toward the camera. I grabbed the radio, even though nobody else was in the building. "Security," I said. "The aquarium is closed." The figure stopped. It turned toward the curved acrylic wall, as if something inside the empty tank had caught its attention. Then another person entered the tunnel behind it. Then a third. They came in at regular intervals, each walking to a different section of glass. A man in a pale shirt, a child with a hood, a woman whose hair hung in a dark sheet down her back. None of them looked at one another. They all faced the empty exhibit. The motion sensor panel showed no activity in the tunnel. I switched camera 9 to full screen. Digital noise crawled over the figures, softening their outlines. There were 7 now, then 9. The child raised one arm and pressed a hand to the glass. On the desk behind me, the visitor counter clicked. I did not lift the tape. I called the police. The dispatcher listened patiently, then asked whether I was certain they were inside and not reflections from the lobby. I told her the building was locked and that the people were visible on camera. She sent a unit but warned that flooding might delay them. While I was on the phone, the old public address system chimed. A woman's recorded voice filled the building, softened by age and static. The 2:15 presentation will begin shortly. Guests are invited to find their seats below the surface. The exact time was 1:22. Every figure in the tunnel turned toward the camera. I could not make out their faces. The image broke into broad gray blocks wherever a face should have been. But I knew they were looking at me, not at the camera, at the security office, through 2 galleries and a locked door. Camera 16 changed. The concrete wall was gone. The feed showed a narrow corridor lined with blue carpet. Brass railings descended along both sides, and at the far end stood a pair of double doors. Above them, dim letters spelled Pelagic Hall. I had never heard of Pelagic Hall. One of the double doors opened inward. Beyond it was darkness with a faint green cast, the color of seawater far below sunlight. Something passed through that darkness. It was too large and too close to identify. The camera shook when it moved. I called Danner. He answered immediately. How many? He asked. I had not told him anything yet. There are people in the tunnel. How many tests? I lifted the electrical tape. The visitor counter read 38. 38. Danner exhaled. Listen to me. Do not go into the galleries. Do not let the announcement finish a second time. In the cabinet under the fire panel, there's a breaker marked pH. Pull it. I found the breaker. It was older than the others, a black ceramic switch in a box by itself. pH had been written beside it in faded red pencil. The announcement chimed again. The 2:15 presentation is now seating. Guests with red tickets may enter through. I pulled the switch. The building went dark. Not just the public lights. The monitors, the emergency signs, the exit lights, everything. The phone died against my ear. For several seconds, all I could hear was rain and the slowing fan inside the security console. Then I heard water. It began somewhere beyond the admissions desk, a deep rushing sound traveling through the building. It was not in the pipes. Pipes rattle and strain. This was the smooth, enormous sound of a current moving through open space. My flashlight was in my hand. I do not remember taking it from my belt. I aimed it through the wired glass. Wet footprints crossed the lobby. They appeared one by one on the dry tile. Bare human footprints, each shining in the flashlight beam. They came from the direction of the ocean tunnel, past the admissions desk, and stopped outside my door. The handle turned once. I backed into the fire panel. The handle turned again, slowly, until the latch pressed against the deadbolt. From the other side of the door, a child whispered, "We can't find our seats." I did not answer. The child tried the handle a third time. Behind that small movement came dozens of soft noises, wet clothing shifting, breath passing through noses, feet adjusting on tile. The lobby was full. Then the security monitors came back on. Only the monitors. Every screen showed camera 16. The blue-carpeted corridor was crowded with people. They stood shoulder to shoulder facing the doors of Pelagic Hall. Each held a red paper ticket. At the very back of the crowd was a woman in a security uniform. It took me a moment to recognize my own ponytail and the reflective strip across my jacket. The woman on the monitor looked over her shoulder. Her face was clear. It was mine, but not as it appeared that night. She looked older. The skin beneath her eyes was gray, and her hair was wet. She raised one finger to her lips. The double doors at the end of the corridor opened wider. Every person outside my office turned at the same time. I heard their feet pivot on the tile. They began walking away. The child remained by the door for a few seconds longer. "You have the last ticket," he whispered. Something slid beneath the door. When the footsteps were gone, I looked down. A rectangle of damp red paper lay against my boot. Printed on it in black ink were the words Municipal Aquarium, Pelagic Hall, Admit 1. The date was February 17th, 1987. That was 34 years earlier to the day. The police arrived at 2:06. They found me still locked in the office. The building was dry. Camera 9 showed an empty tunnel. Camera 16 showed the concrete wall. The red ticket had become a strip of blank, pulpy paper that tore when an officer picked it up. Danner arrived before the police finished taking my statement. He told them the power failure must have caused old footage to play from the recording system. When I asked him what Pelagic Hall was, he said he had never heard the name. I quit before sunrise. 2 weeks later, I went to the city archive. I expected to find a canceled exhibit, maybe an architectural plan that explained the corridor. The clerk brought me a box of aquarium proposals from the 80s. Pelagic Hall had been real, at least on paper. It was designed as a deep ocean theater beneath the eastern parking lot. Visitors would descend a carpeted ramp into a circular room surrounded by water. Construction began in 1986 and stopped the following February after the excavation flooded overnight. The official report blamed a broken municipal main. There was one newspaper clipping in the file. It described an after-hours tour held for donors on the night before the flood. 38 guests entered the construction area. A photographer took their picture near the temporary entrance. The photograph showed 39 people. At the edge of the group stood a young security guard wearing the same style of jacket I had worn. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, "She says she is waiting for the last show." I moved away from Brackett that spring. The aquarium reopened 18 months later under a new private owner. I avoided every article about it until an advertisement appeared automatically on my phone. The ad showed a family smiling inside the renovated ocean tunnel. Behind them, the tank was full again, bright with silver fish. At the far end of the tunnel stood a woman in a security uniform. Her clothes drifted around her as if she were underwater. She was holding a red ticket and looking directly at the camera. The advertisement had a button beneath it. "Reserve your visit," it said. 1 seat remaining. The second story is called Gate 19. Airports are designed to make waiting feel temporary. The arrows point forward. The clocks show several cities at once. Every corridor promises that if you keep moving, you will eventually arrive somewhere. Concourse C at Calder International had none of that. Even before it closed, it sat beyond the airport's natural flow. Passengers reached it through a glass corridor that crossed above the baggage road, then descended 2 long escalators. When those escalators stopped at night, walking down them felt like entering a ship after everyone else had abandoned it. The air grew colder 1 step at a time. Sounds from the active terminals faded until all that remained was the buzz of emergency lights and the faint vibration of aircraft moving somewhere behind the walls. The shops had been emptied, but not stripped. Pale rectangles marked where shelves once stood. Menus above the food court still offered prices from a decade earlier. A children's play area held a fiberglass control tower with 1 cracked window. We sometimes found its plastic radio handset hanging loose even after placing it back in the cradle. What bothered me most were the clocks. For analog clocks hung above the central information desk, labeled Calder, London, Tokyo, and local. Calder and local should have matched, but the local clock was always 11 minutes slow. London had stopped at 3:13. Tokyo ran backward by 1 minute every night. The airport electricians swore none of them had power. June made me cover the clocks with contractor bags during our second week. She said she was tired of seeing them. The next morning, all 4 bags lay neatly folded on the information desk. It had been sealed for 11 years when my company received the rewiring contract. The airport planned to reopen it for regional flights, and before the electricians could install new displays, somebody had to identify 6 miles of undocumented network cable above the ceiling. That somebody was me. My crew worked overnight because the live concourses could not risk an accidental outage during business hours. There were 4 of us at first. By the 3rd week, 2 had been reassigned, leaving me and a technician named June Armas to cover the closed terminal from 10 at night until 5 in the morning. June was 52 and had spent most of her adult life inside Calder. She knew which service elevators shook, which coffee machines were never cleaned, and where baggage handlers went asleep during weather delays. She remembered Concourse C when it was open. It was always cold, she told me on our first shift alone. Even in August, people missed their flights because they kept walking toward the wrong gate. The concourse was shaped like a long tuning fork. Gates 1 through 18 lined the 2 outer arms. Gate 19 sat where the arms met, facing a square of concrete between the runways. There was no painted stand outside it, no fuel connection, and no line for guiding an aircraft to the jet bridge. The bridge itself ended against a blank steel plate built into the outer wall. I assumed it was left over from some abandoned design. June did not like working near it. The first time our cable map brought us to 19, she stopped her cart 30 feet away. "We can mark that section inaccessible," she said. "The ceiling is open. Then mark it asbestos." I laughed. She did not. Above the gate counter, an old split-flap display still hung from the ceiling. All the other displays had been removed. Its black tiles were dusty and blank. A row of molded plastic seats faced windows painted with a white protective coating. The carpet beneath them had faded everywhere except for a path leading to the jet bridge door. Our plan showed a network drop behind the counter labeled C19 old. The cable was easy to find. It came out of the floor in a steel conduit and ended in a beige socket. Somebody had screwed a small brass cover over it. Stamped into the cover were the words "Do not bridge." "That's not electrical language," I said. "It's airport language," June replied. "It means leave it." We skipped it that night. The next week, our project manager emailed to say Gate 19 was the only unresolved circuit in the entire concourse. He wanted a continuity test by Friday. I forwarded the message to June. She replied with a photograph of a handwritten maintenance log dated 1999. Circuit C, 19 isolated by order of airport operations. No testing after 0300. Below that, in different handwriting, someone had added, "No arrival scheduled." I called June. She told me we would test it before midnight and be finished long before 3. At 11:40 on Thursday, I removed the brass cover. The socket behind it was not Ethernet. It looked like one at first, but it had 10 narrow contacts instead of 8. A cable in our kit fit loosely enough to hold. I connected it to a diagnostic unit and sent a low-voltage signal down the line. The tester displayed a length of 2,806 feet. That was impossible. The farthest equipment room was less than 900 feet away. I ran it again. The display showed 2,790 feet. "It got shorter," I said. June stared at the number. "Unplug it." Before I could, the split-flap board above us moved. One tile clicked over, then another. The dry mechanical sound carried through the empty concourse. Dust shook loose and drifted in the beam of my work light. The board assembled a line of pale letters. MRD 702. Holloway. Delayed. June pulled the cable from the wall. The board kept clicking. The final column changed from delayed to expected 313. "What's MRD?" I asked. June had already begun putting tools into her bag. An airline that doesn't exist anymore. And Holloway, a place that never had an airport. She told me to pack up. I wanted to photograph the display first, but when I raised my phone, every tile flipped blank. We reported it as a power anomaly. The project manager sent an electrician the next afternoon. He found no power supply connected to the board and no cable behind the old socket. According to him, the conduit went 6 inches into the floor and ended in concrete. That should have finished it. Instead, our manager accused us of falsifying test results. He had the diagnostic unit's automated log. At 11:41, it had recorded a valid connection of 2,806 feet. At 11:43, the length was 2,751. At 11:45, the cable status changed from open to approaching. He ordered us back to Gate 19 the following night with a facilities supervisor. The supervisor never arrived. June and I waited at the gate until 12:15. She called his radio twice. On the second call, somebody answered with 3 seconds of airport noise, rolling luggage, overlapping conversation, and the rising whine of a turbine. Then the channel went silent. There were no departures on our side of the airport after midnight. Through the painted windows, we could not even see the active runways. June set her radio down. My first husband worked this concourse, she said. It was the first personal thing she had ever told me. His name was Luis. He worked for Meridian Regional, whose code had been MRD. In April of 1999, he finished an evening shift and did not come home. Airport police found his employee badge on a shuttle bus. His car remained in the staff lot. Security video showed him entering Concourse C at 2:58 in the morning and walking toward Gate 19. There was no video of him walking out. Why would he come here? I asked. June looked up at the blank board. He said his mother had called from Holloway. Holloway was a reservoir town 2 counties east of the airport. It had been evacuated and burned during a wildfire in 1974. Luis had grown up there. His mother died during the evacuation. June said that after he disappeared, other employees came forward. A cleaner heard her brother paged at Gate 19, though her brother had been dead for 6 years. A dispatcher saw an arrival for Holloway appear on a terminal that was not connected to the scheduling network. Airport management isolated the circuit, sealed the windows, and eventually closed the concourse during a budget cut. You knew this could happen, I said. I knew stories. You knew enough to tell me not to test it. Her answer was interrupted by the public address chime. A clear male voice spoke from every ceiling speaker. Calder International welcomes Meridian Regional Flight 702, arriving from Holloway at Gate 19. The split-flap board began to turn. MRD 702. Holloway. Early. The current time was 2:48. June whispered something in Spanish and reached for her radio. It spoke before she touched it. June. The voice was male, older, and softened by static. She closed her eyes. June, I missed the staff shuttle. I grabbed the radio and switched it off. The voice continued through the dark screen. Can you open the door? Somewhere inside the wall, machinery started. The jet bridge motor had not been connected to power, but I knew the sound from active gates. A hydraulic whine followed by the uneven rumble of rubber wheels crossing concrete. The wall vibrated. Above the sealed door, a red light flashed. June stepped behind the gate counter. I caught her arm. That is not him. You don't know his voice. You told me he disappeared here. He's been waiting. The white paint on the windows began to darken. At first I thought it was moisture. Then long, vertical streaks appeared as if rain were running down the opposite side. The paint turned transparent in patches, revealing not the square of concrete outside, but a runway at night. Blue edge lights stretched toward a black horizon. Far away, 2 landing lights hung low in the sky. They did not grow brighter. They grew farther apart. The thing approaching us was wider than an aircraft. I pulled June away from the counter. She fought with a strength I did not expect, twisting toward the door as the radio called her name. I dragged her behind a support column and wrapped both arms around her. The arrival board changed. MRD 702. Holloway. Landed. The concourse filled with sound. Not one sound, but hundreds layered together. Announcements in different languages. Children complaining. Wheels knocking over tile seams. Coughing. The hiss of aircraft ventilation. It all came from the empty seats, the dark shops, and the corridor behind us. People began appearing in the windows. They were visible only as reflections. A man in a narrow tie sat in a seat that was empty when I turned to look. A family clustered around luggage from the 70s. A woman in a red airline uniform stood behind the counter, though June and I were alone there. Every reflected person faced Gate 19. The red light above the jet bridge turned green. The door opened. Beyond it was a carpeted passage lit by amber wall lamps. It should have ended at the steel plate after 10 feet. Instead, it sloped downward farther than my flashlight could reach. Cold air blew out, carrying the smell of ash and hot pine. At the far edge of hearing, a man called June's name again. She stopped struggling. "Luis," she said. Every reflected passenger turned toward us. The woman behind the counter lifted a microphone. "Passenger Armas may now proceed to the gate." June went slack in my arms. For one foolish second, I loosened my grip. She drove an elbow into my ribs and ran. I caught the back of her jacket 2 steps from the open door. The fabric tore. She crossed the threshold and disappeared around the curve of the impossible passage. I went after her. The temperature dropped the moment I entered. The carpet beneath my boots was blue, patterned with small gold stars. Framed travel posters lined the walls. "Visit Holloway," once said. "See the lake beneath the pines." In the poster, orange firelight reflected on the water. June was 20 feet ahead of me. A man stood beyond her with his arms open. I saw him only from the back. He wore a maroon ground crew jacket with meridians stitched across the shoulders. Gray ash lay in his hair. June stopped. The man lowered his arms. "You took too long," he said. His voice was no longer coming from the radio. It came from everywhere inside the bridge. The wall lamps went out one by one behind him. As each light died, the passage beyond it changed. Carpet became cracked asphalt. The framed posters became burned tree trunks. A line of people stood along both sides of a road under a red sky. They held luggage and watched us with patient, exhausted faces. The man turned. Where his face should have been was the dark oval of an open doorway. From inside that doorway, many voices said, "Last shuttle." June stepped forward. I grabbed her torn jacket and pulled with everything I had. We fell backward. The man reached for her. His arm stretched past the nearest lamp, then farther, the sleeve lengthening without wrinkling. My hand struck a metal box on the wall. I felt a recessed button beneath a plastic cover. "Emergency bridge retract." I broke the cover with my palm and pressed it. An alarm screamed. The passage buckled. For half a second, the carpet dropped away beneath us, and I saw open night below, filled not with concrete, but with hundreds of runway lights arranged in the shape of streets. Then the jet bridge began to tilt. June and I slid toward the gate. The man's fingers closed around her boot. I kicked his wrist. It bent as if it contained no bone. We crossed the threshold together. The door slammed shut hard enough to crack its narrow window. The sounds in the concourse stopped. The windows were white again. The reflections were gone. The arrival board displayed a final line. MRD 702. Holloway. Return to origin. Then the tiles went blank. June lay on the carpet breathing in short, painful bursts. Around her ankle was a black handprint that smelled of wood smoke. The facility's supervisor found us at 3:30. He insisted his radio had failed and that he had spent the last hour trying to enter through a locked service door. The gate camera had recorded nothing except a burst of static from 2:48 to 3:14. Our contract ended the next morning. The airport paid us 6 months' wages in exchange for signing documents that described the incident as an electrical accident. June took the agreement. I did too. Concourse C never reopened. Airport management reversed the project and demolished both arms the following winter. I watched a local news clip of the excavators tearing down Gate 19. Behind the wall, where the jet bridge should have been, workers found a length of blue carpet descending into the earth. The airport said it was construction debris and filled the hole before reporters could see it. June and I stayed in touch for a while. The handprint faded from her ankle, but every April she received a voicemail from an internal airport number. She never listened to them. She sent them to me, and I saved each file in a folder without playing it. Last April, no voicemail arrived. Instead, my airline app added a boarding pass I had never purchased. The flight number was MRD 702. The destination was Holloway. The boarding time was 3:13 in the morning. Under passenger information, it listed June Armas and me. Her status said boarded. Mine says gate closing. The final story is called Below the Archive. Old hospitals collect records the way houses collect dust. Every room remembers who passed through it, but only the basement remembers their names. I learned that at St. Aldwyn Medical Center, during the 6 weeks I spent converting its paper archive to digital files before the building was demolished. St. Aldwyn had been empty above the 3rd floor for almost a year. The new hospital stood across town, all pale wood and glass, but decades of patient charts remained in the old building. They filled rolling shelves in Basement 3. Births, surgeries, accidents, fevers, recoveries, and deaths, each reduced to a manila folder with a colored number on the edge. The job was simple. Remove staples. Scan each page. Check the patient number. Place the chart in a locked bin for shredding. The archive was arranged by department and year, but the building's history had made the order uneven. St. Aldwyn began as a charitable infirmary in 1908, expanded into a brick surgical hospital, then swallowed neighboring buildings whenever funding appeared. The oldest charts were narrow cards filled with fountain pen handwriting. Later decades arrived in thick folders swollen by lab printouts, electrocardiogram strips, consent forms, and carbon copies so fragile they stained our gloves purple. Each shelf had a small hand wheel in case the motors failed. Labels were bolted to their ends. Maternity, respiratory, oncology, deceased. Someone had turned the final label to face the wall before our crew arrived. No matter who turned it back, we found it hidden again the next night. There was an odor beneath the paper smell. At first, I thought it came from the mop sink. Minerals, old plaster, and something faintly medicinal. Lena recognized it as carbolic soap, which the hospital had not used in decades. The smell grew stronger near the southern wall, where the concrete was always several degrees colder than the rest of the room. During breaks, Mr. Bell told us about records employees who had worked there before computers. They knew regular patients by the sound of a folder leaving the shelf. They could find a dead surgeon's handwriting among 1,000 pages. According to him, some refused to say that a patient was gone until the discharge form had been signed. A hospital doesn't understand gone, he said once. It understands admitted, transferred, discharged, or deceased. If nobody completes the line, the patient is still somewhere in the building. We treated it as the kind of gloomy wisdom people collect after spending a career underground. There were 6 of us on the night crew. Our supervisor was a graduate student named Priya, who drank tea from a thermos the size of a fire extinguisher. Lena Vega ran document prep. Sam and Curtis moved boxes. An older man named Mr. Bell indexed the scans, and I worked the high-speed scanner beside him. We were scheduled from 7 at night until 3 in the morning when the demolition surveyors arrived. The archive had no windows and no cell service. Its only connection to the upper floors was a freight elevator and a stairwell that unlocked from our side. A pneumatic tube station hung on one wall, though the pipes had been cut near the ceiling. Someone had taped a sign over it. System retired, 1986. On our second night, the tube bell rang. It was a bright mechanical ding that made all 6 of us look up. A red plastic carrier sat in the receiver. Priya laughed because the alternative was admitting how strange it was. She said Sam must have found an old carrier and dropped it into the machine. Sam was at the other end of the room, moving cardiology boxes. The cut pipe above the station ended in open air. Lena removed the carrier. Inside was a folded requisition form yellowed at the edges. Please forward chart 44017 to B4 hydrotherapy. The request was dated October 6, 1952. Mr. Bell looked up from his index terminal. There is no basement floor, he said. He had worked hospital records for 31 years, so we believed him. Priya kept the form to show facilities. The next night, it was gone from her desk. Nobody admitted moving it. After that, the tube rang at least once each shift. Sometimes it delivered blank nursing notes. Sometimes labels with numbers that did not exist in the index. Once it delivered a glass thermometer wrapped in cotton. The mercury line was below the printed scale, and the glass felt so cold that frost formed where Lena touched it. Facilities sent a man to inspect the station. He unscrewed the front panel, confirmed that the motor had been removed, and traced the cut pipe with a flashlight. It goes nowhere, he told us. While he was still speaking, the bell rang. We all watched an empty receiver spring open. The facilities man shut it with both hands and wrapped a chain through the handle. He left without completing his work order. The chain was on the floor when we arrived the following night. Priya wanted the station removed. Hospital administration refused because the brass faceplate had been listed in a historical survey. Their email said we should document any further mechanical failures and continue working. So we continued. Our quota was 8,000 pages a night. There was always another shelf, another box, another name. Once the scanner was running, the steady pull of paper made it easy to ignore the tube bell. Then I found Lena's chart. It came from a box labeled Orthopedics, 1978 through 1981. The folder was new, clean manila among softened brown files. A white label on the tab read Vega, Lena M. The date of birth was hers. So was the home address. The admission date was that night. I assumed someone on the crew had made it as a joke. The first page was an emergency department form filled out in faded blue ink. It described a 31-year-old woman admitted with hypothermia after prolonged cold water exposure. Arrival time, 2:40 in the morning. Condition, disoriented, unable to recall leaving the archive. It was 1:16. I called Lena over. She read the page without speaking. Beneath the emergency form were temperature charts, medication orders, and progress notes spanning 3 days. Each page looked decades old. The doctor's signatures were illegible. The final sheet was blank except for 2 words typed under discharge destination. Basement 4. Lena dropped the folder. Priya gathered everyone around. Sam denied making it. Curtis swore he had carried the sealed box directly from the shelving bay. Mr. Bell searched Lena's patient number and found no record in the live database. Then we shredded, Priya said. She fed the folder into the locked disposal bin. At 1:30, the pneumatic tube bell rang. The red carrier contained Lena's chart. The folder was wet. Priya ended the shift. We packed our things and took the freight elevator to the lobby. I remember feeling foolishly relieved as the floor numbers counted upward: B3, B2, B1. Then the display changed to B4. The elevator began moving down. The light inside dimmed. Water ran from the seam between the doors, first as a thin line and then in several cold streams. Lena backed against the wall. Sam pressed every button. Priya used the emergency phone and heard a busy signal. When the elevator stopped, the doors opened 6 inches. Beyond them was a corridor lined with small white tiles. Water covered the floor to the height of the elevator threshold. Glass lamps burned behind wire cages. A wheelchair stood in the middle of the corridor with its back to us. Farther away, a nurse pushed open a door and looked in our direction. Her uniform belonged to another era. Her face was hidden by the darkness of the room behind her, as if the doorway continued through her head. She raised one hand and beckoned to Lena. The elevator doors strained wider. Mr. Bell hit the red stop button, then pulled it out. The doors reversed. Just before they closed, the empty wheelchair rolled toward us through the water. The elevator rose so abruptly that we all fell. It opened in the lobby at 2:03. There was no water on the floor, but the cuffs of Lena's pants were soaked. We refused to return for 2 days. Hospital administration held a meeting by video. A lawyer explained that B4 had appeared because of a control board fault. Condensation from an unused utility level had entered the elevator. Historical costumes had been stored in the basement, which was apparently supposed to explain the nurse. They offered a completion bonus if we finished before demolition. I wish I could say we refused. Every one of us needed the money. The hospital added a security guard and promised to disable the elevator below B2. We returned on Monday. The guard stayed for 40 minutes. Then his supervisor called him to a loading dock alarm. At midnight, the tube delivered 6 folders. There was one for each member of the night crew. Sam's chart described a crushed left hand. Curtis had smoke inhalation. Priya had lacerations from broken glass. Mr. Bell's admission page simply said, "Returned for continued observation." My chart listed acute sleep deprivation and auditory hallucinations. Lena's chart had changed. A new nursing note appeared at the front. Patient failed to present at scheduled time. Transport requested from Archive B3. From somewhere beyond the rolling shelves came the sound of an elevator bell. We did not wait for Priya to make a decision. Sam and Curtis ran for the stairs. Mr. Bell followed. Priya pulled the fire alarm. Nothing happened. I grabbed Lena's folder and went after her toward the stairwell. The door would not open. The lock indicator was green. The push bar moved. The door felt as if someone were leaning against it from the other side. Behind us, metal shelves began to move. The archive used motorized shelving to save space. Normally, you pressed a button and one aisle opened while the others closed. Now the rows shifted on their own. Heavy carriages rolled across their tracks, closing the route to the elevator and opening a narrow aisle at the back wall. Cold air flowed through it. "There's a service exit," Priya said. Mr. Bell shook his head. "That's the foundation wall." The aisle ended at a door none of us had seen before. It was painted institutional green and had a narrow wired glass window. Flaked lettering read B4 hydrotherapy. Patient transfer only. On the other side of the glass, water moved in darkness. The handle turned. Lena's folder pulled against my hand. It did not slip. The cardboard itself twisted toward the door as if caught in a current. Pages tore free of the fasteners and flew down the aisle. They struck the green door and flattened against it, wet ink spreading through the paper. One page remained in the folder, the blank discharge sheet. The handle turned again. Mr. Bell took the page from me. "Every chart needs a disposition," he said. Even then, surrounded by moving shelves and flying paper, he sounded like a records clerk correcting a form. He led us to an old wooden desk in the indexing bay. Its drawers held supplies that predated the computer system: grease pencils, metal label frames, dried ink pads, and a heavy rubber stamp with an adjustable date. The stamp read "Discharged against medical advice." Mr. Bell pressed it into a red ink pad and stamped Lena's final page. The green door stopped moving. The cold current died. The loose pages dropped to the floor. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then the pneumatic tube rang. Another carrier arrived with a single typed note: "Discharge not authorized by attending physician." The elevator bell sounded again, closer this time. The shelves began to close around us. Mr. Bell opened my chart, found the discharge sheet, and stamped it. He did the same to Priya's, then Sam's and Curtis's. Each impact echoed sharply through the archive. When he reached his own folder, there was no discharge sheet. "Mine never had one," he said. The freight elevator doors opened at the far end of the room. The car was gone. In its place, tiled stairs descended into black water. A brass handrail vanished below the surface. The same nurse stood on the third step, visible now from the shoulders up. Behind her, shapes in white gowns crowded the stairwell. Mr. Bell stared at them. "I know those patients," he whispered. The nurse lifted a clipboard. A paper band encircled her wrist. Printed on it was Bell's full name. Priya pulled him toward the stairwell door. He resisted. "They were in the annex flood," he said. "My father kept these files." Until that moment, none of us knew St. Aldwyn had ever flooded. Mr. Bell told us later that his father had been the hospital records director in 1952. Basement 4 housed hydrotherapy baths and a locked convalescent ward. During a storm, a retaining wall failed. Water filled the level before the elevator could be raised. The hospital reported an electrical fire and quietly sealed the floor. The dead patients' charts were never discharged. Administratively, they remained admitted. And so, somehow, did the people who had worked their records. The nurse stepped upward. Water poured from her uniform, but never lowered around the stairs. Mr. Bell grabbed the stamp. He turned his chart over, searching for space, then stamped the cardboard cover. Nothing happened. The nurse reached the top step. I saw her face clearly. Water streamed over pale skin. Her eyes were open, but the pupils floated loose, moving with each tilt of her head like dark sediment in a glass. She held out the clipboard to Mr. Bell. He took it. The instant he touched it, the archive lights went out. In the dark, the shelves moved all at once. Steel struck steel. Boxes fell. Someone screamed. I felt Lena seize my hand and pull. We ran in the only direction that remained open, guided by the red glow of the fire alarm panel. Behind us, the freight elevator chimed over and over. The stairwell door opened without resistance. 5 of us reached the lobby. Mr. Bell did not. Firefighters searched the basement and found the archive in perfect order. The rolling shelves were closed. The green door was gone. The freight elevator was parked at B3 with a dry floor and no damage. Mr. Bell's coat hung on the back of his chair. His chart lay on the desk. On the cover, beneath the useless discharge stamp, a new line had been typed. Transferred to B4 records. The hospital canceled the digitization project. Demolition began 3 days later. When excavators removed the archive's southern wall, water flooded the site from a sealed cavity beneath the foundation. Work stopped for a month. No fourth basement appeared on any survey. Lena recovered. So did the rest of us. As much as people recover from something they have agreed not to discuss. I kept the discharge page from my own chart. The red stamp faded to pink over the next year. The paper always felt slightly damp. Last month, St. Aldwyn's new hospital emailed me. They said an automated audit had found an incomplete patient record under my name. They wanted me to verify the attached scan. It was the same chart from the basement, but there was one additional page. The page recorded my discharge against medical advice. Beneath it, a doctor had added a note in blue ink. Discharge reversed. Patient located off-site. Transport will be sent when archive reopens. At the bottom of the email was an appointment time. Tonight, at 3:13. As I finished writing this account, the elevator in my apartment building stopped on my floor. I heard its bell through the wall. There was water under my front door. Those were tonight's 3 accounts. If you ever take a job in a building that is supposed to be empty, remember that empty is an observation, not a promise. Count the doors. Check which floors the elevator claims to serve. And if the building welcomes guests who are no longer there, do not let it learn your name. This has been the Ashen Frequency. Until the next transmission, keep one light on.